And
And you
we
sold your soul, and now we've got a nice sponsorship deal. Excellent. Good
well,
luck.
I haven't done anything yet. All I did was I was like, let's have a
It's more like
conversation.
renting it, Ollie, but I hear you.
uh,
Like an Airbnb. Yeah.
this definitely shouldn't make it to the
No,
Patreon subscribers,
A
because if they
definitely
verbo
do
not.
for my
sponsor us,
soul. You can come spend time in my soul.
Right. That's the $7 per month Patreon level
Yeah,
there.
right, right, right.
is this from seeing your fake product placement features?
That's what
And
it
they
is.
go,
Oh
oh,
no, I don't
this
know.
guy
I
this
didn't.
guy takes product placement. Let's do it.
I mean, I
Yeah,
always check.
I just think it's great that a suppository company would come out to us and say, this seems like the right podcast for us.
Yeah, well, it's the right industry, right?
Yeah, that's
Consult.
right. We're at the right end of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Consultants Saying Things. I am Chris Lockhart, and I am joined by, I'm right in the middle here, guys. This is great. I love it. I got Phil Yanoff on one side, and I have Oliver Kronk on the other side. Guys, good to see you. One of the things that I've been thinking about, I don't know if you may not know this, but at one point in time, there was an industry in the United States, and I think it was a global one, and this industry made buggy whips. And if you think of the olden days riding around in a buggy, you needed sort of a whip to get your horse to do what you wanted to do. And at one point in the United States, it was a $50 million a year industry that had 42 different companies making buggy whips. So at one point in time, if you were going from point A to point B, you had a buggy whip in your hand. Everyone had one. And then suddenly that entire industry went away. And today, believe it or not, there's one buggy whip company left in existence. So the question is, well, what happened, right? And obviously we can go into things of, the automotive industry and Henry Ford and like all the Model T and all this sort of stuff. But I was kind of thinking of this like with AI and all of the hype, especially over the holiday season when everyone's thinking about AI and doing a bunch of LinkedIn stuff. Are we at a buggy whip moment when it comes to consulting? And is it a result of maybe not AI in particular or deep learning or any of that sort of stuff, but maybe it's the large language models themselves and how they're being used. And I'm thinking about this. Just recently, ChatGPT released the ChatGPT store, and I'm looking through all these different models and whatnot, and there's a whole bunch of them in there for writing statements of work, writing proposals, creating entire PowerPoint presentations. And certainly we know Microsoft with its Copilot, we've got all kinds of Copilot help for Excel and all like financial models and all sorts of stuff that traditionally management consultants in particular have done. And on the technical side of consulting, we've got Copilots as part of GitHub and other tools that are now doing north of 50, 60% of the code writing. And so the question comes to me, which is, are we at a buggy whip moment in the consulting industry? Phil, I know you've done some thinking about this. Where do you think this is going? Are we at that point in time? Do you have a buggy whip? I think is really the first question. Do you own a
Well,
buggy whip?
actually, Chris, I was thinking about starting a buggy whip business of my own, but it just didn't seem very stable.
Well, there's only one competitor, so there you go. What are you thinking?
I always thought that was a dad joke that just didn't land. Next time, I'll stop horsing around. Let's get to the
Whoa, I love it.
let's
No
get
more
to this.
horsing around. Get on the
Yeah.
bandwagon. All right.
Yeah, no, so I think the thing is, it's super easy. Let me tell you what I think part of the problem is, right? As consultants, part of what we've been using to sell our goods is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And now it's come for us, right? But I think there's this question of, are we in a buggy whip moment? Is there a significant, and of course, and let's put it in, more technical terms. I don't know. Is this a disruptive moment? is this a disintermediation moment, right? Those are the real concerns. Are we to be disrupted? Are we going to be disintermediated? And or is it something else? And the thing is, I don't know that any of us know this for the long haul, but the thing is, there are so many tools available in and of this moment that simply weren't available for us before, that it allows us to take what I thought. Listen, I think my best capability, the thing that is the most valuable to me or to my customer, for me, or when I'm doing this kind of work, is my ability to think through a problem. And now I've got tools that kind of amplify that, right? And I think that's kind of where it could be. The question is, is the question they asked so simple so that they could just go ask Chat GPT this question? I think that's what
Yeah.
we're trying to figure out.
I think you're right. And, Oliver, we've talked, I think, before about the amount of automation that's been available to us for years now, right? And that has taken menial tasks that are commodity type tasks and made them a lot easier, right? Even up to like, I need to book a flight or I need to book a restaurant reservation. There are tools to help us with all that. But I think we've said on this podcast before, and I think maybe Wendy may have said it, and I think you have said it, Oliver, that but there's still the human mind part of this at work, and that for years, that are we going past that? Because some of these things look like they can kind of do stuff that maybe traditionally we thought was going to stick around for a lot of years.
So my key phrase for this one in most cases is you won't be replaced by AI, but you'll likely be replaced by someone else who is using AI. It's a bit like if you were still handwriting stuff, and the typewriter came along. If you didn't adopt the typewriter, then you would be replaced by someone who knew how to use a typewriter. Same with word processors and all sort of stuff more recently, right? So I think that's where we are. However, we've touched on previous episodes about there are certain jobs and certain roles, and maybe this also applies to the consulting industry, and we can discuss. Like if we look at the actors, space for a moment, because that's the area this is hit first, I think, isn't it? Is the content kind of creators and the extra, who's paid not an awful lot of money per movie, but that part of the reason that they were protesting is, hey, if the studios can automate my presence in the back of a film as an extra, well, I'm not a big headline actor, so I'm not going to be able to sell my rights. They're just gonna take that likeness of me and use it evermore. And so I do wonder if there are certain things in the consulting world where some of it's somewhat handle turny, and it's maybe work that the client could have done themselves, but they didn't have the time, so they've kind of just outsourced it. It's like that managed service sort of thing versus the real high value creative strategic consultancy advisory work that where there is the big smart human with experience type code. So I think there's a real spectrum here of this augmenting a smart human who's got a lot of experience and knowledge through to certain parts of the consulting just going away because they'll be automated a bit, like we don't handwrite an awful lot of stuff anymore.
Well, so on the actor bit, right? And in the US, right, they had the actors. I think it was more that was more around residuals, streaming and whatnot. But the point is that if I don't need Harrison Ford to have Indiana Jones, what does that mean, right? And I think so. Yeah, like so do we protect those extras? Do we protect those role? Do we protect Harrison Ford's likeness and looks, or do we say it's all in the public domain and from an acting and a content creation perspective that whatever that doesn't really apply? But I think you can sort of move that argument over to the consulting world. If I have written, I have I think every deck and everything that I've ever written, right? And it's sort of like if I've got that content and it's made available through the internet or whatever to these models, should I get a piece of that? Should I protect my IP? Are
So
we going down the protectionist road or not?
I think it's certainly in the UK sort of employment contracts, at least. It's not the individual consultant that will have access to the IP. The IP generally will belong to the consulting firm, the employer, right? So I think lawsuits are definitely coming in this space because there's already one. I think it's the New York Times or one of the newspapers is already going after
Washington Post, I think
Washington
maybe it
Post.
is.
Thank you for
New
correcting.
York Times.
Is it in the New York Times?
It's New
Somebody.
York Times.
Well, it's one of those two. It's one of those big East Coast newspapers, and I think you already have the open source community kind of asking questions about, is it fair use of open source licensing that these tools can write code based on all the corpus essentially of open source code bases that are out there. That's how it's doing it, right? So I do wonder if the moment will be when the big four consultancies and the big three sort of strategic ones kind of realize that all those white papers they've been making available for free as like marketing collateral, that model isn't going to work because you're essentially providing that to the large language models and other models, and I'm sure we'll get onto perhaps other more human behavioral models in due course as well. So actually, will the kind of consulting model change, and you'll see less free advisory marketing type stuff out there because they realize they're essentially feeding the automation that potentially replaces the need for some of that consulting work. It's going to be really interesting to see how the whole model shifts.
Well, there's something around that, right? Which is the buggy whip industry wasn't killed by a better buggy whip, right? It was not even another way to motivate a horse. It was a completely different, it was the internal combustion engine that killed the buggy whip industry. And who in the buggy whip industry could have predicted the internal combustion engine? Probably none of them, right?
Mm.
So like we're consulting's not being killed by just like faster, better automated consulting. It's being, if it's going to be killed or adjusted or modified or impacted, whatever, it's being impacted by these models, right? It's almost like the definition of how knowledge is going to be used, not the use of the knowledge itself, almost. Am I getting that right? I don't know.
I
Phil
think
would.
you're right. There is something there, isn't there, around
Yeah.
is this just something that augments and makes consultants more efficient? I think in the short term, that's what we're seeing.
Mm.
In the medium to longer term, do you need a consulting firm for everything that you're currently asking them for? But I think this comes back to what's the value of the consulting firm, and
Mm.
the value of the consulting firm isn't necessarily that they can do something that you can't do. It's that you're shifting risk and you're almost getting a get out of jail free card, right? Like, oh well, it's not my fault that went wrong. We got advice from XYZ consultants, so well, it's their fault.
Right.
Or this won't go wrong because we've had advice from top firm X. So I think there is more than just the deliverable end product. That's the value of
You're saying
consulting.
it's the trust. It's the trust of the established brand that we stand behind our audit advice or whatever.
And if there's one prediction that many are making about 2024 is that the trust thing is going to become an issue for these models, right? I think we've been playing around with them, but we're going into election cycles. That I fully expect there'll be backlash, and it will be related to trust and mis and disinformation relating to these models. But anyway, Phil, sorry, you were gonna say something.
No,
Yeah.
it is a huge can of worms, right? I mean, there's just all kinds of questions to be asked here, but I was trying to think about it from our point of view, right? As someone who's in the consulting practice, what happens to us? How do we navigate these waters? But it's certainly shifting. Here's the thing. As a rule, I don't know if I care about the industry. I care about me. I care about my family. I care about my customers. I care about the people I work for. Will I be able to make a career out of this? So I think the next 20 years, for example, changes. But I also think I've got all that time to adapt. If I were going to be doing this for 20 years longer, I doubt that. But the thing is, depending on where you are in your career, you will navigate that. I mean, did we not think at some point, I lived through client server and I lived through distributed computing and I lived through, I mean, you know, I actually did do a little bit of mainframe work in the beginning, but it was also AS400s. I mean, the
Pick
technology is
OS.
shifting.
Pick OS. Right? Weren't
I
you?
did not do Pick OS, but I knew people who did Pick OS, right? Yeah, mine is always I programmed in Lotus Notes. I got paid to do Lotus Notes stuff for a long time. Anyway, I think the technology changes. We have to move. Yes, it's a big shift, but I don't need to borrow the problems from 20 and 30 years from now to get through this next 10 years of what I'm doing. And the thing is, but I think we could give some advice. And Oliver, I'm curious, particularly you're thinking about this. But if you're in the consulting business today and you think you've got 20 years ahead of you, what decisions are you making today to help you navigate this tumult.
Wait a second. Why Oliver? Oh, he's the only one with 20 years ahead of him? Come on
I
now.
was really just trying to change the subject, really. I'm trying to get Oliver to think about something else, but yeah.
Well, I think you've said something really interesting here, and I've discussed this with a consulting colleague, actually, someone who's quite a seasoned, our chief operating officer, actually. He's been in consulting for a long time, and he and I were talking about this. And one of the things we realized is you almost need to look back at those other technology transitions that we've been through, and the internet, I think, is probably the closest one that we've been through that's similar to this, right? Initially, it was like, oh, this is quite a cool way of getting access to information. And then I think we only really realized later on down the line quite how impactful things like e-commerce and e-government and various other things have been, right? So it feels to me like we should look backwards a little bit at how transformative what has the internet been in the medium to longer term on consulting. Like there are different types of consulting work. Clearly we're advising on online kind of channel type operating model type work. So there's new types of work that have come about, and clearly we've got that in sort of how do you make the best out of AI, but that's kind of not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is we need to look at the sort of changes in the industry as a result of the internet and as a result of any client being able to Google search something. That clearly those tools have been used by consultants to stay just ahead of a client, for example. But so I kind of feel that there's a bit of that going on that we should look at in order to kind of think about what might this mean for consultants. What's the impact of the internet been on consulting in the medium to long term, and therefore think similarly along those sort of lines about the impact AI and data technologies will have.
Well, yeah, you think about like travel agencies, right? I mean, I think that was one of the very early ones. It was like, I
Totally
can
disrupted.
totally disrupted. But if you go back to the example, buggy whips, you've got 42 companies, a $50 million a year industry in the 1800s. That was big, right? And it's like, okay, what was the first reaction? Well, of those 42 companies, maybe one or two start to go bankrupt. Well, you start to let's see if we can gain efficiencies. Let's see if maybe we do mergers and acquisitions, right? So you begin to get consolidation. You begin to get, let's reduce the cost. Let's make a better buggy whip. Let's have better market rate. The answer wasn't, I'm going to leave the buggy whip business and I'm going to start making horns for the automobile. I mean, maybe some of them did. I don't know.
That, well, that was going to be my was
research,
going to
but
be my point. Was
yeah,
actually, yeah, did some of those companies branch out and
yeah.
see the oncoming train coming and decide to kind of get ahead of it by
Leather
diversifying.
seat covers. They went to
Leather
leather
seat
seat
covers
covers.
from the because of the horse. Yeah. Um, yeah. But what I'm thinking is like, uh,
I'm sorry, I've only just got that joke.
yeah, no, it's like I was thinking of a horsehair thing, but it's not going to work anyway. But the glue factory, something, whatever. Yeah, got into the glue factory business. Anyway, we'll cut that out. Animal rights activists.
Just for Patreon, just for Patreon.
Just for Patreon. They hate horses there. So, what the hell was I going to say? Oh, it's not about just becoming better consultants and firing half the partner class this year and gaining efficiencies, and isn't that's our natural reaction to this kind of change, isn't it? And it seems like what we're saying is no, you're not just trying to create a better consulting company that's more efficient, that can compete, right, with these tools. You need to pivot
Yeah,
the
100%.
model of your business to something else. I don't know that we know what that is, but
And if I go back for a moment to my days at the large consulting company that I dare not name in case their legal firm is what
yeah,
their legal arm is
right.
watching, one of the things I was trying to do there was get them to innovate and think about their IP and using it in different ways. And this is pre AI. Well, no, it's not pre AI. We were doing some AI work as a result of that. But it was like, how do you codify what you do? How do you structure that and maybe sell it? Is there a data offering there? Is there an automated version of your offering? Because of course consulting spreads a vast spectrum, as we know, of different things, right? From high level strategy, C-level advisory, all the way down to helping do regulatory reporting and quite granular data driven type activities and audit and things like that. So working with them, it was like looking at like, yeah, what is that thing? What is the value you're offering to a client? Could that be streamlined? Could it be automated? Could you create as a service type offering for this knowledge and this IP? And can you become the product owner of what you do, so that rather than doing it, you essentially codify it and think about how that can go to market in different channels in different ways. And that's what I think the smart consultants will be doing at the moment, is looking, right, in the medium to longer term, does what I do still remain relevant in a world where you can get heavily automated or heavily crafted answers?
Well,
And how
I
do I
think,
adapt?
yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think we're on this, right? In the near term, practically speaking, right? Leverage these tools to be better at your craft, right? Write better proposals, things of that nature. In the long term, and this, I think, this is a different conversation. We could talk long term, and we'll talk to Julia about
Yeah,
what.
absolutely. I was going to say we'll probably have a future episode with Julia talking about
Yeah,
the kind of longer term implications, but I can definitely
yeah,
see, the internet opened up APIs as a way of exchanging value and a new channel. And I can totally see, like, we were starting to see the GPT marketplaces like you were talking about earlier.
yeah.
um, I can totally sort of see a future where there is a new channel unlocked for a consulting firm where you effectively become a data broker or a knowledge broker to some of these AI
Yeah.
services,
Well, yeah, like AI tools and services for consulting firms, right?
or for
But
a particular vertical. So, say there's it's retail, like
FS, yeah,
yeah,
whatever.
absolutely.
But I mean, I don't know, Phil, you're usually better at thinking about this, but like, is there room for human thought? And at some point, won't these things be able to perform the analysis? Like Oliver mentioned, like, what's the best market for my product to go to? You can ask that now. And the answers aren't terribly great, right? But like at some point, won't what is left for the human consultant to do?
You
Nothing.
know, I think the thing
Silence.
is, if you think about these LLMs, right? I mean, there's some way that you could frame this as like they're sort of producing an average response. They've like taken everything that's out there and they've kind of given you to the middle of the road. Who among us says what I really want to do is to be average?
Yeah.
I mean,
I want the crowdsourced version of the answer for my business.
yeah,
Yeah.
what is it we are here to do, even on this podcast? It's insights. It's insights per minute, right? And the idea is that is a very human thing that at this point, right? It's still a look. And by the way, I want to get back to one of the points that Oliver made early on, I think is very important, is that the person using AI is so much more capable than the person who's not using AI, that they are the real threat. When Oliver was talking, I was thinking, you know what? AI is like power armor for the brain. It basically allows me to shoot farther and faster and do more. And so I think it's just a bit of intellectual power armor. What
I
do you
like
think
that.
about that?
Like a mech warrior, right? With
I
like,
was thinking, yeah,
you're thinking mech
I had
warrior.
a no,
But
well,
but
I mean, I am a mech warrior guy. I've got those
but is this a
figures everywhere,
slippery?
but yeah.
Is this a slippery slope to the Borg? Kind of Elon Musk's vision of Neuralink, where we're
Yeah.
forced to kind of, or the new generation. This is what I worry about. My kids growing up at the moment. Like, will they some point in their career have the really difficult decision of, do I have this either invasive or non-invasive procedure where I can connect my brain to kind of
Yeah.
the AI technologies, because it's the only way to compete in the kind of market. And if you don't, you're effectively limited to manual jobs, right? The
Yeah.
knowledge economy world is cut off for you if you don't make these quite difficult choices about
Yeah.
increasing your capabilities neurologically.
I mean, I think this is really fascinating because, as a fan of Star Trek, there's Khan Noonien Singh, right? The biomedically engineered and genetically enhanced superhuman. And I think growing up, we were kind of all thinking like, well, that's going to happen. Like that, we're going to genetically engineer people to be smarter, better, faster. I think we've passed that point now, right? To the extent that maybe some of that's happened and there's some biohacking or whatever might be going on, right? I think we're kind of past that point where now it's like, no, 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 we can use technology to augment rather than just genetically enhancing. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. That takes us in a completely different
It's just a
direction,
different
but
it's a different technology.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, the thing is, if you could fly, wouldn't you? If you could run faster, wouldn't you? If you could be smarter or come up with a good answer for a client faster, would you not say yes to that?
maybe I don't like, what does it do
Depends on
for
the
me?
client.
I guess depends
I
on the
think it
client.
also depends on the unintended consequences, right? So,
It's a
um,
fabulous question, Oliver. I just don't think lots of people don't think about that first. The first
right.
thing is, could I jump higher, run faster? Could I punch through
Could I
a
earn more
wall or
money?
whatever?
Earn
Could I
more
earn more
money is
money?
where I
Yeah,
was
the
going.
answer is
Right.
yes to all of that.
Yeah.
But then when you're done, and then I think you're right, is like, well, what are the negative externalities of that? Well, they were terrible at thinking of that because, we're all noble creatures.
So all right, I'm a cat on the ground. I'm out there, I'm plugging away. I'm a developer. I see increasingly code suggestions from Copilot and GitHub, right? Constantly, they're getting more and more and better and better. And at some point, I'm just going to be writing comments, or maybe not even that. I'm just going to be doing quality review. What? And maybe 10 years from now, that job doesn't even exist. But like for like 1 to 2 years, what should I be doing if I'm out? Like, I should be using these tools to get better, to enhance.
Experimenting for sure. Yeah. And I think keeping an eye also on it's hard obviously not to get too distracted by the next shiny thing and the hype thing. And I think we'll perhaps talk about the large action model thing that Rabbit have announced. But
Yeah.
I do honestly think that the LLM will get to a certain point where we go, great, that's effectively the SQL database tier of this technology stack. The next tier on top will be essentially like the integration, kind of layer where different component tools can come together and provide something new. And I honestly think it's the behavioral pieces, the behavioral modeling, that's where it's going to get super, super interesting. Because the language part, yeah, that's the way we kind of communicate. But the consulting behavioral set, once someone creates that as a model, and then that leverages LLM to produce and understand content and documentation,
Mm.
that interfaces maybe with the slide model that creates the perfect slide deck. Once you've got that orchestrated, that's what's coming, and that's what people need to be aware of. Is like, when is that? Is because when that comes, you're going to need to jump on that train very rapidly, because there will be a limited window where you can remain relevant and stay tech savvy enough to kind of continue to do your craft
Yeah.
without being outgunned by people that have jumped on that train ahead of you.
So what I hear you saying is, in the near future, instead of installing Microsoft Office, I'm going to install my personal LLM that knows all of my content and thinks like I do, and then I'll just tell it to go write a proposal or
So I'm
whatever.
already doing elements of this now. I will openly admit that right now,
You're not there. It's an avatar that is talking to us
no,
right
no.
now.
Well, yeah, yeah.
All right.
The next episode, I might just set up my kind of video generated self.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, like when I literally this week, I've had various deliverables to do for clients. I've had proposals to input into, and I'm using Claude on a regular basis. I'm not just kind of copying and pasting it. And of course, there is still a human degree of is this thing right? I'm going to fact check some of it. I'm going to make sure it's correct. But it's all it's allowing me to do far more work at a far better quality level than I could have done before. And I think so. It's already here. So in the short term, if you're not already experimenting with some of these tools and potentially even paying, like I'm paying for Claude because it gets me better results faster.
Yep.
So yeah, I think in the short term, experimenting and seeing how these things help you, but in the medium to longer term, keeping an eye out on what's coming next. And um, certainly things like large action models and behavioral models and things like that
Yeah.
are definitely worth keeping an eye on.
Well, let's talk about large action models for a second, right? I mean, you know, I think it's one thing. I'm going to leverage these Copilot tools or these LLMs to augment the work that I, as a consultant, am doing, so I can, like an augment, I can do better, faster, I can jump higher, right? I can punch through walls now. But the large action model seems to me to be a sort of a shift, right? It's a little bit, it's different, right? Because now what I'm saying is I'm going to almost commoditize the device that I'm interacting with things, right? And I'm going to make that less the secret sauce. The secret sauce now is, what are the things that need to happen, and how do those things happen, and connecting all that tissue together, right? In other words, does Apple get out of the iPhone business at some point? The device no longer matters. Alexa goes away because it, or the Echo goes away because the device no longer matters as much, maybe.
So I'd love for you to include in the show notes something I wrote in 2016, which is apps are dead, long live seamless experiences. And
When you were in grade school, was that?
I not quite, but I predicted that apps would go away
Yeah.
way too early, right?
Right.
But what we're getting to is a point where technology just gets out of your way, and things just become a bit like the Star Trek computer or the Jarvis, where you basically just say, look, I want this, just sort this. I don't care how you're going to do it. Just do this thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to worry about learning how the hell Excel works or what the thing does.
Yeah. So, all right. So, look, I think there's that. There's like let's augment our stuff, right? Let's augment our stuff. Let's augment our capabilities and use these tools to do things in consulting better, faster. There's the hey, let's look at things like the impending elimination of apps or the technology becoming more invisible for us, right? And recognize that presents opportunity for consultants and other people and vendors and whatnot. But I think there's another piece here which I've highlighted in the episode guide, which is I think for the foreseeable future, and maybe if we talk about 10 years from now, it'll be different. But I think for the foreseeable future, the soft skills is an area, and we've harped on this many times, right, on this podcast, is like being able to communicate effectively, having emotional intelligence, right? The creativity of coming up with um, new innovative approaches to problems, which, let's be honest, a large language model is learning about what's happened in the past,
Yes.
right? As opposed to creatively thinking about, well, at least not yet, creatively thinking about like potentially things that are not based on what's gone before. So I think there is that role still, isn't there, for
Have you
consultant?
heard of affective computing?
I have not.
So affective computing is basically computing that can detect human emotion and change
Oh,
response.
affective.
Yeah,
Effective? Like
no, sorry.
really, really effective,
Yeah,
or an affectation,
affective.
right? Like, yeah, I see. Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah,
So that's pretty scary, actually. I learned about that a few years ago. So that's been around for a while. That's effectively looking at facial cues.
yeah,
And I think when that kind of gets thrown in the mix, the best salesperson will potentially be an AI because they'll be able
mhm,
to, in real time, detect how a
yeah,
customer is responding to a
right.
pitch and
Oh,
adjust.
he's starting to zone out of my, whatever it is. Okay,
But
yeah.
also think that it'll have A/B testing of
Mhm.
so much volumes of sales data or presentations or whatever. All of that, all the teams recordings of every pitch will be fed into this thing, right? And it will effectively know the best way to kind of sell you something or persuade you of an argument for something. I think you're right though. This thing is, and Phil made this point as well. This thing is only ever an average of the content that goes into it for now. Um, but I think everyone is over indexing on the natural language processing and natural language generation element of this at the moment. What they're not realizing is that's just the tip of the iceberg because the machine learning community has been doing all kinds of clever stuff. Look at AlphaGo that DeepMind did. Look at all the various things that are out there. What we're going to see now is wave upon wave of new exciting model that does something amazing. And so much like the internet kind of, oh, you can do this on the internet now. Oh, now you can do this on the internet now. That's what we're going to see, I think, over the next few years is this like breakthrough after breakthrough. And businesses and consultants are going to have to pivot and go, right, which of these are relevant to me? Which am I going to invest in? Which do I think are hype and they're just marketecture?
Yeah.
Which are actual things that are worth making a bet on and getting my team to really use and leverage.
Well, Yanov, doesn't that get to sort of the how do there's a role for consultants to filter the wheat from the chaff on this stuff? People will pay for that, right? I've got all
Yeah,
this LLM crap generated. Tell me what the hell it is useful for me, my business.
yeah. I mean, we've been relying on people paying us for our decision making capability, our ability to analyze and synthesize and so forth. And I think that just kind of that continues. Um, Again, I'm kind of rolling back to this idea is if you're in this consulting space today, how do you respond to this? What is it you want to do inside that space? And I think the answers to that are first, you should be vigilant. Pay attention. I think putting your head in the ground for this is not a good plan, right? Looking away, situational
This won't
avoidance.
impact me. Right?
It's a
Yeah,
fad. It'll go
well,
away.
Yeah.
Like the internet
it's a
was a
fact,
fad.
right? That's right. This is never going to do it. I think you need to be vigilant. I need to think this is a great opportunity. By the way, the water is roiling. So this is the time to skill up. If there's an opportunity to play with tools, experiment with it, realize that it's the beauty of this is it's all brand new territory. So you can get in there and be right at the front of it with a very small investment. Later, it's going to be pretty expensive to catch up. Right now, it's pretty simple to make your move. to Oliver's point, and you, Chris, you mentioned this earlier, number three is be human in this space, right? How can I actually add that human element to my decision making stuff? How can I do the thing that the LLM is not going to do? And then I think as a defensive thing, I think there's two other strategies. One is niche down. This is a great time for you to like think more about your industry or the people that you're dealing with or the tools or technologies, but a way to kind of like say, look, I'm going to get closer because I can understand this in a way that others cannot. And I think that's useful. And my last piece of this is get closer, right? Get closer to your client, understand what their fears and concerns are in this changing environment, and what do they need, and how can you help them?
The I love those points, Phil. And what now occurs to me is this is going to suit certain consultants better than others. And we've all done those personality type tests, right? And what I'm kind of hearing from what Phil's just saying is those that came out as quite creative, quite personable, natural leaders, more empathetic, kind of the more in touch with other people are going to probably do quite well out of this. The people that are going to struggle are the highly analytical, throw them in the back door, get them to code, get them to create the spreadsheet model. They don't generally interface brilliantly with clients, but they do great analytical, detailed thinking work.
The
Unfortunately,
experts, the
yes,
experts.
some of that unfortunately is going to get picked off by the AI because it never has a sick day and it never gets something wrong, once it's set up with the right input data and
And it's
setup.
not grumpy. It's not a grumpy developer that doesn't want to interact with other humans and just wants to pound Mountain Dew and
I
write
think that's
code.
right.
And so my point, I guess, is that there are going to be a group of people, particularly in the tech space and the kind of analytical space, this is going to be a really hard transition for because they've been able to get away with perhaps not developing their communication skills and so on because they've been paid very handsomely for their expertise. But it's going to be a wake up call for them when all of a sudden you don't need a COBOL programmer anymore because there's a decent COBOL copilot out there. That for me is quite scary. I think there is a group of people that are going to struggle with this because they don't have easy access to the skills to dial up to kind of have that social networking and salesy communicate presenting. That's just not in their skill set today, or it's harder for them to do that. So it's going to be quite a hard, painful leap potentially for them to make. However, they could, of course, flip into I'm going to get deep into the technology side of this that's enabling all this to happen. And that's probably the smart move for those people is to get
That's where I was going to go
deep
with
into
it.
the AI skills.
Yeah. If you're that kind of person that's going to get disrupted, then you're best served by being in the forefront of the people developing this technology,
Yeah.
right? In other words,
Right.
I'm going to leave the buggy whip industry because that's all I know, and I'm going to get into the assembly line industry, right? Or whatever the buggy whip equivalent is, the accelerator. I'm going to make accelerator pedals for the automobile to make it go faster. I think there's another piece
Nice.
of this. You like that?
I like that. It was good. Well
Yeah,
done.
yeah. Clutches. I'm going to make clutches.
Yeah.
Anyway, it occurred to me that if you go back to the beginning of what data science was in the 50s and 60s, right? And it's like there were suddenly these machines that could crank through all of these numbers, whereas it used to take a bunch of people to do it. Now, I think of there's a scene in Mad Men, right, where like they get the mainframe for the first time, and suddenly they're cranking through all this ad information, and they don't need a bunch of people; they just need one guy to interpret it. And then that got bigger and bigger and bigger. In other words, a new industry was born, right, of IT as it grew into, and it started with analyzing data. And now here we've come full circle 60, 70 years later, where it's like those people, the technology has now caught up. Those people can go away, right? And it's sort of like that's interesting because now we're back to anyone can use these tools. You don't need a computer science engineering degree in order to generate code or create a product that is an internet-based product or something. Basically, anyone can do these things. I mean, it's not 100% there yet, as we've said, but I think it's shortly. Look at where we've come in just a year with this stuff, right? A year from now, like the end of this year, in our Christmas episode, in season 7 of this year, right? We'll be talking about like, wow, how disrupted everything has become. And look, Google just laid off 20,000 people, right? What were they doing? Were they writing code? Is that being done by something else now? I think it's interesting. So are we in a buggy whip moment? Final thoughts, guys. Are we in a buggy whip moment when it comes to consulting? Are we in a buggy whip moment?
Yes and no.
Oh, the consultant answer. AI could never do that.
And I think, I summarized it recently in one of my social media comments, I think, which is for the handle turny stuff, then yes, I think that's going to go away. For the kind of stuff that you need a human, that you still, to the point that technology doesn't provide the kind of human level decisioning capability, and I think that's where we are for the next year, at least in my view. The consultant industry is the augmented consultant industry. That's the short to medium term view for me. And so yes, I think it is in a buggy whip moment. We'll look back and go, yeah, this was a buggy whip moment. But right now we're still feeling the first phases of it.
I know, but here's the thing: Oliver took both sides of this already. So I mean, we're kind of stuck. I mean, there's nothing left. Can I just say
Sorry.
maybe? Maybe? I don't know. Maybe.
We were
Um,
automated out of it, Phil, by
yeah.
by Oliver the Avatar.
That's because I used
I
Claude to help me come up with an answer. Sorry.
nice. I like um here's the thing. I think, sometimes it's kind of nice. I like Oliver keeps using the hand cranky or something like that. But the idea is there's sometimes we're building machines and sometimes we're just running them, right? So sometimes we're creating processes and new things. And sometimes we are, in fact, turning the crank on that thing and just trying to spit out as many of whatever it spits out as we can. Um, you know what? It's fun on those days. It's almost a vacation to kind of be able to sit around and turn the crank. I think we're in a moment where we don't get to keep turning the crank. We are now in a spot where the ground is changing and we have to decide how we're going to adapt to that. But you know what? I think it's a lot of opportunity. A lot of exciting stuff goes on in this moment. And uh, reputations and fortunes will be made in this moment, and it's up to us to decide where we want to be on all that.
So what you're saying is we need a consultant saying things LLM that trains people on how to be consultants, better consultants. That's what I think.
Baby, you can't bottle me. There's only one Phil Yano.
I'm going to put you in a little rabbit device, R1.
Yeah.
The trouble is, Phil, Chris has several hours, if not days, of your recorded insights,
Oh yeah.
which he can feed in. But we never need to do an actual podcast recording ever again. Chris can just generate all of
Listen,
them moving forward.
I mean, I here's my prediction. I don't like predictions, but I'm going to predict within season 7 of this podcast, we will have a virtual episode of just AI generated us. It may not be very good, but I mean, how
It
would you
might
be
be
able
like your cats
It
that
would
you've got
compare to
Dali to
season
generate.
one.
to see it would be like season 1? Yeah, we'll have
It would be
Shashi.
compared to season
We'll bring
one.
in Shashi. Yeah.
Well, as per
Yeah.
the Christmas episode, Shashi has been outed as a generative AI
That's
already.
right. That's true.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
No, Phil, my thought on this is, and I think you're right, which is, um, I think it is buggy whip moment for some types of consulting, right? And if you are the type that likes to build the machine versus run the machine, I mean, I think I took a little bit different slant. I think it's like, look, if you really love being in the code of things, you need to be thinking about job security, right? And you need to be, if you want to stay in that writing of code, you should be writing AI code, the plumbing of this thing, right? That is the future for that type of consultant. If you are a management consultant, a thinker consultant, to whatever extent we think, right? It's you need to be augmenting, you need to be using these tools. I'm going to go one step further. Here's what I think anyone listening to this right now that is in the thinking part of the consulting world, you have to immediately protect your IP. And what I mean by that is everything that you've done up until now, if it is owned by somebody, that's, as Oliver you point out, generally that's the case, right? They own it all. All that's gone. Any special secret sauce that was in that, AI knows about it now, right? It's like the Borg, right? Once they assimilate somebody, now they know that thing. So you've got to now, starting now, put your firewall up, your virtual firewall, and anything that you do now, keep it close to the vest That's now you. That's part of what you can bring and your value that you can add to this. Now, maybe you use that to train your own LLM for you personally, your own personal assistant to write and think and create in your voice. But don't let other people use that because, I mean, what do you got then? You got nothing, right? You are now just out in flapping in the wind, whatever. All right, listen, guys, I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for being here and talking about this. I and Oliver, I think and Phil, we've talked about. There's a research report that was put out by a colleague, friend of ours, and I think we're going to talk to her also about sort of this same kind of topic, but in the sort of the longer term, where we get into some more
Crystal ball gazing.
yeah, vagaries, right, out into the future.
Some
Sci-fi,
some jiggery pokery even.
jiggery pokery,
Wow. I meant to
possibly.
work that in earlier. Yeah.
That's awesome. A little jiggery pokery, possibly,
Yeah.
potentially. We'll see. All right. So anyway, Phil Yanoff, Oliver Kronk. Thank you guys. I'm Chris Lockhart. See every. Oh, hey, by the way, I don't know if you guys know, there's a Patreon site that has been set up. I don't know if you're aware of this. So if
Almost.
yeah, it's
I almost got out of here without
I
mentioning
know, here it
it.
is. If you are interested, dear listener, in additional content that has never been seen before or heard before, we've got season one up on the Patreon site. That's patreon.com/consultants saying things. You go find that, sign up, small fee. You can get access to all of that stuff, and we'll be cranking out more material and special events and things of that nature as part of that. So join our crew. You know, you should also subscribe to the channel. All right, that's it. That was the
Good.
promo. All right,
Excellent.
guys. Thank you very much. We'll see everybody next time.
Adios.